Rachel Reeves told me earlier that she'll come back from maternity leave in January. She'll go to the backbenches because she says Jeremy has to have a team that shares his vision, and she is not one of those people. So no one knows how it's going to work. Another senior shadow cabinet member said to me, we are in who knows territory. How can Jeremy Corbyn bring in discipline? How can he tell them to do what he says, to vote with him, when actually for the last 30 years he's barely voted with his party. He's barely shown any loyalty to Labour leaders over the years. So all this is to happen. Mr Corbyn says he's going to have a much more consensual approach. We're even hearing that at Prime Minister's questions, which he will have to do on Wednesday, he may well let other people have a go at quizzing the Prime Minister. We just don't know how that could possibly work. The Prime Minister might well say, well, if he's not going to be there, I won't be either. So we will have to see how all that happens. But there is no doubt that this contest, the last 10 weeks, have absolutely shaken the Labour Party to the core, and it has changed British politics, at least for the next few years.
Vicky, we're just hearing, in fact, that we're going to have an interview with Jeremy Corbyn in about 5 minutes from now, so we will hear something and some of his first reaction. I suppose on a human level, a personal level, it would be so interesting to find out just how shocked he is, because this is a man who was persuaded a few months ago to join this contest because there was a section of the party that felt that its views needed to be represented, that more left-wing views needed to be quite rightly discussed as part of the debate. And now, here he is, the leader.
Yeah, and it is very difficult to explain to people how incredible this is. A man who's been on the backbenches for more than 30 years, really pursuing his own, often controversial causes. He has never held a job in the top of the party. He's never been a minister. He doesn't have that experience. But I think, obviously, as this wore on, in the beginning, of course, he couldn't even get on the ballot paper with genuine supporters. He had to have votes lent to him. As it's gone on, of course, obviously has dawned on him that he might well win, although even 3 days ago when I spoke to him in the House of Commons, he said it had occurred to him that even at these rallies where there were thousands of people turning up, he did think, well, actually, are these people actually just here to see me, just to get in on the action for a bit, or are they genuine voters and supporters? Turns out that they were. He's now leader of that party. I mean, what's interesting that as a character, he's quite a gentle person. He's not a rabble-rouser in that sense. He's not a George Galloway type of figure, and he may well want to reach out and try and keep that party together. The question is whether those around him, whether those who now feel that they've got their party back, if you like, people who left Labour under Tony Blair, who walked out in protest at the Iraq War, they're maybe back here now. Will they allow him to try and make and build those bridges with the party? We just don't know if that's going to work out like that.
And exactly, and then so some of the key appointments that we wait for, Vicky, really are Shadow Cabinet and so Shadow Chancellor, Chief Whip, some of those key posts, and those appointments will be a pointer as to where he is headed, as to what extent he can unite the party.
Yeah, that's right. So Chris Leslie, who is the current Shadow Chancellor, has already said that he will not serve under Jeremy Corbyn. Yvette Cooper, of course, who came third in this race, says that she won't either. Rachel Reeves too. So a lot of people with a lot of experience will not be there. Ed Miliband, we heard from earlier, says he also wouldn't take part. And it is interesting hearing these people saying, look, he's got a huge mandate, we've all got to support him, although I'm not going to do it by being in the Shadow Cabinet. So in a way, we'll have to see who there is. It's got to be someone who shares his vision, surely. I think defence is going to be the trickiest one. That's the one that really divides the party on issues like Trident. He would be hard pushed to fill a Shadow Cabinet with people who agree with him on getting rid of Trident. We'll have to see what he does about that. On NATO, for example, he's talked about leaving NATO. He did say to me in an interview a couple of weeks ago, actually, that he wouldn't push that issue. The thing is, though, of course, the Conservative Party are going to be pushing all of these issues, trying to force that wedge, trying to show the divisions that there will be in the Labour Party. It's going to be very difficult for Labour MPs to know quite what to do when they come back here on Monday.
Yes, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because when we have people like Rachel Reeves and Tristram Hunt already, almost instantly saying, I'm going to the back benches, I'm curious. Well, the message that sends out is quite overwhelming. And I asked some people here today about that. I asked John Prescott, Lord Prescott, I spoke to Ken Livingstone about it. Now, they were quite dismissive. They said, oh, Rachel Reeves, who's ever heard of these people? That's broadly was their approach. But the point is, these are actually, within political terms, really quite big hitters. So what does that do to the party that quite big names are instantly putting their reaction out there?
Yeah, I mean, they're right to some extent. Of course, these people aren't necessarily well known by millions of voters. On the other hand, they are the people with experience. Now, other Jeremy Corbyn backers say, well, hang on, some of these people wouldn't have been asked in the first place. It was going to be very unlikely that Tristram Hunt would be invited to be a part of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. I suppose the question is, what do they, the people that view themselves as the modernisers and the moderates, how do they see this going forward? They have talked about forming a group, and they've also said they're going to put forward ideas. They say there's 5 years to another general election. That's not being disloyal. It just means the party still has to have a debate about policies and the direction that it's going to go in.
Vicky Young, many thanks. That is it from here at Westminster for now. Much more to come. Let's return to Anita McVeigh in the studio. Anita.
Jane, for the moment, thank you very much, and we will continue our coverage here of the result of the Labour leadership contest. And let's go straight now to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's outside the pub where Jeremy Corbyn will be making his victory speech. And in fact, I think he's currently making that speech in a pub, Norman.
Yeah, he is. It's slightly ironic because Jeremy Corbyn actually doesn't drink. But as you can see behind me, if you're waiting for a drink in that pub, you're going to have to wait some time. Absolutely packed, rammed with Corbyn supporters. One of them who just stepped forward this way, sir. Your take on today?
Oh, what a fantastic result. I think, we've got a real mandate to move forward and start challenging the lie that austerity is the only option to bring this country forward.
And were you surprised by the scale of Mr Corbyn's win?
I was truly moved. Truly moved.
What do you put it down to?
Because he's an honest man. And people realise and value that.
A lot of people saying he's done so well because he has won over predominantly younger voters.
There is an element of that, but there is also a massive element of people who've rejoined the party after abandoning it for 10, 20 years. There is also a massive element of new people who have been turned off by politics. But I think it, having spent a lot of time campaigning, there is a massive diversity, not only in age, but in race and in social background for this movement and this campaign.
Were you a Labour Party member before? Have you come back because of Jeremy Corbyn?
Of course.
So why did you sort of become disillusioned with the Labour Party?
I don't want to say, but Jeremy Corbyn has been my MP. I live in Highbury, and he is a man of his word. He's a man of honour, a man of great commitment, and I can say nothing but praise for his work ethic, his integrity.
Okay, both of you, thanks very much. Enjoy the day. We're just going to walk down here because Jeremy Corbyn is inside. Some suggestions he might try and come out shortly. Now let's just park ourselves around here. If you follow me around, let's have a look. Okay, I think there's limited chance of getting in if I'm if I'm honest. It's absolutely round packed in there. You can see here. Let's just go down here. See if Jeremy's coming out here. Yep, there comes Jeremy Corbyn. He's coming out now. See if we can see him just there, going into the taxi, surrounded by people again. Probably going now to, I would suspect, Parliament Square, where there's a rally for refugees, which the staff said he would go to after, if he was victorious. So I think that is going to be his next stop. There goes Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know if that's the first time he's visited a pub in a long time, because as I say, he's not a drinker. From here, I suspect the next pick-up point for Jeremy Corbyn will be in Parliament Square, where significantly he's going to address that refugee rally. After that, I'm told, he is going to go to Labour Party headquarters to talk to party officials to reassure them that he wants to create a broad church, that they will be welcome in the party, they don't have to abandon ship. And after all that, I'm told, he will go home and start the really torturous process of trying to put together a shadow cabinet. And that is going to be an absolutely critical moment. The shape of the shadow cabinet he puts together. Already, some people have said absolutely not, they won't serve. Rachel Reeves has said she won't serve. Chris Leslie has said he won't serve. Interesting, a lot of people are wobbling, though. I spoke to Chris Bryant. He said his instinct was that he might serve if he was asked. And I think there's a lot of Labour people who are thinking, OK, didn't vote for this guy, but let's cut him some slack. Let's try and see what sort of Labour Party he puts together, and if he's willing to create a broad church, then let's join in. So I think that first he will get a degree of flexibility by people willing to see whether he is indeed going to create that broader Labour movement.
OK, Norman, top marks for trying to get into that pub anyway. Norman Smith there for us. Well, let me just tell you that we think Jeremy Corbyn is going to be speaking at approximately 4 o'clock at that rally in support of refugees in Parliament Square. We will, of course, bring that to you. Right now, though, let's get some reaction to all of this from Scotland. Our Scotland political correspondent Andrew Kerr is there. And Andrew, we've already seen the new Scottish Labour leader warmly welcoming the news that Jeremy Corbyn is the new Labour Party leader. What other reaction have you been able to gauge there in Scotland?
Yes, Anita, well, first of all, from Team Corbyn here in Scotland, they are absolutely delighted, over the moon at the news that Jeremy Corbyn won that astounding victory, really. Jeremy Corbyn was campaigning here in Scotland during the summer months, of course. Many people packing out those meetings, as happened across the United Kingdom. Now, Team Corbyn are saying Labour has voted for a new type of politics. Great news for Scotland and the UK, but they do say that a huge amount of work now needs to be done. You mentioned Kezia Dugdale, the Scottish Labour leader. Well, she has been giving her reaction, saying she's pleased at the news too, but looking in social media, her appearance there was criticised. Some people saying she had a rictus grin, some people saying her appearance there was rather wooden, because of course you might remember that during the campaign she had said a Corbyn victory would leave Labour carping on the sidelines, and she said at the time during the campaign that he had to convince her that he could make a good Prime Minister. When I was speaking to her yesterday, she did say that he would be a credible Prime Minister, and she's looking forward to welcoming him to Scotland soon. And of course, with Corbyn politics, anti-austerity, anti-Trident, it will be very interesting to see if he might win over some of the people who voted yes in last year's referendum back into the Labour fold. Now, a very interesting reaction, of course, from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. She congratulated Mr Corbyn. She wants a progressive anti-austerity alliance with him, and she's pressing him to join with her 56 MPs at Westminster as soon as possible for an anti-Trident renewal vote. So the anti-Trident bloc might be quite a powerful one at Westminster. But she makes a very, very interesting point. She says the Labour Party is bitterly divided. And of course, thinking of that, well, you wonder if Labour can win in 2020, which might be good news for her. Another 5 years of a Conservative government. That might mean another independence referendum coming down the line. Let's get some more reaction now from Henry McLeish, the former First Minister of Scotland, a Labour First Minister. Mr McLeish, thank you for joining us, and just your reaction to the Corbyn victory.
Well, it's been an extraordinary political contest and quite a remarkable result. And I think, like many supporters, many Labour Party members, you know, the party's always been a broad church, a coalition of interest. I think Germany will seek to build a coalition of interest, and nothing will be gained by him taking an exclusive kind of overt left-wing position on everything. I think he'll reach out, and if he does, then I think there'll be dividends down south. England is very different, and of course there will be dividends in Scotland. So in that sense, people should rally around this opportunity. It's a new era. I would also give a warning to those who are self-indulging by saying they won't do this, they won't do that. They are actually confronting Labour Party democracy. They may not have liked the system, it's delivered a result, and I think north and south of the border, it's a good way for us to go forward.
But do you think that Jeremy Corbyn could be a credible Prime Minister, credible candidate to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Well, I think it's interesting to look around the world just now. There's some interesting developments, whether it be Greece, whether it be Spain, whether it be even the US. You know, politics is on the move. A lot of people are massively disillusioned with what they regard as the old political classes. So let's wait and see. I mean, this is a huge step. I mean, I was in the House of Commons for 14 years when Jeremy was there. I mean, clearly this is a major step for him. And obviously I'm interested in what his views will be about Scotland. And thankfully so far he's been listening, and he hasn't made any on the stump instant policy making, so that augurs well for Scotland. But no, you're right. I mean, it's a huge challenge for him, huge challenge for the Labour Party. But look, This is a different era of politics. We've seen that in Scotland. We've seen nationalism now through the Conservatives in UKIP in London. So I think there's many opportunities, and I just would like to think that people remember that 115 years ago, just a stone's throw from where they met today, the Labour Party was first formed. Coalition then, principled then, and I think if Corbyn does the right thing, he can garnish a lot of support in Scotland, stop the hemorrhaging of Labour voters to the SNP, work with us to get an alternative to the current position on devolution, push for Home Rule. If he can do all of these things, listen, take Kezia Dugdale into his confidence, then I'm sure Kezia will want to retain her distance in terms of being a kind of more independent party, but working with the sister party down south to make sure we can make progress.
Henry McLeish, former First Minister of Scotland, thank you very much for joining us. And Anita, of course, Labour don't face their first electoral test in Scotland at the 2020 general election. We've got one here in May at the Scottish Parliament election. Interesting to see if there'll be a Jeremy Corbyn bounce. Anita, back to you.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Kerr there in Glasgow. Well, let's go to Westminster now, where we're joined by the Conservative Work and Pensions Minister, Priti Patel. A very good afternoon to you. What are your thoughts on Jeremy Corbyn's election? A landslide victory for him.
Well, what we have seen through the election of Jeremy Corbyn is that Labour are now a serious risk to our national security, to our economy and to your family stability as well, whether that's through weakening our defences or weakening our economy as well through increasing taxes on earnings, more debt, more borrowing, all of which of course will hurt working people.
Those are almost exactly the same words used by your colleague, the Defence Minister Michael Fallon, a little earlier when he was asked for his reaction. Looking at comments from some of our viewers coming in and reacting to Mr Fallon earlier, they're saying that the Conservatives are trying to scaremonger over this.
Well, on the contrary, I mean, this is a serious moment, and as Conservatives, we are focused on delivering what we outlined in the general election, our manifesto commitment, which is securing more opportunity, more jobs, more growth for people across the country. And that is our job in government, and that's exactly what we will continue to do.
Are Conservatives perhaps nervous, frightened by this groundswell of support for Jeremy Corbyn and what he represents? Are you worried?
Well, look, what I would say is that what we've seen through the election today of Jeremy Corbyn is that Labour do pose a serious risk to our country on defence, on our economy, and when it comes to families as well, and working people in particular. We are the party in government that is securing a better future for the country through reform when it comes to getting the debt down, sorting out our economy, and certainly in my role as well as Employment Minister, working hard to secure a better future for the public and securing more jobs and economic growth.
Will you perhaps be seeking to secure the support of Labour members of Parliament for some votes where those members of Parliament are opposed to Mr Corbyn? You know, there's been discussion already today about perhaps another vote on air attacks in Syria and whether Labour MPs would vote with the Conservatives on that.
Well, look, I think when it comes to very serious and significant issues such as Syria, of course, that is about commanding support across the House of Commons, and that is something that the Prime Minister has been very clear about. But I think, again, I say today that this is a serious moment. As Conservatives in government, we are focused on delivering a better future for the British public. And, of course, this is a serious time in terms of the risks that the Labour Party now pose when it comes to national defences and our economy and the security of working families across the country.
OK, Priti Patel, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Now, we just want to bring you a little taster of what Jeremy Corbyn had to say a few minutes ago. You may have seen him, or at least the top of his head, in the scrum as he left a pub in Westminster a few minutes ago. Well, let's just have a little taster of that interview. It's not the full interview yet, but it will give you an idea of what he's been saying about his victory.
Fantastic moment, fantastic mandate for changing Britain, fantastic enthusiasm for real democratic politics. It's a great day.
What do you have to say to all your supporters?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. 16,000 volunteers came together to join this campaign. We've shown that politics can change, and we've changed it.
Were you surprised at the sheer majority?
I wasn't a bit surprised at how big it was, but clearly we got support along the way, and the size of the rallies and meetings we've held has been so fantastic that it's great. There's been so many magic moments. 2,000 people in the Armouries one Saturday night in Leeds. Big rally in Glasgow. Again, on that occasion on a Friday night. 2,500 in the Camden Town Hall, with young people trying to climb in through the windows to get to a political meeting. That shows how politics has changed.
Rachel Reeves has said that she won't serve in the Shadow Cabinet, and other people are saying
Okay, that's enough, guys. Come on.
There's going to be an inclusive open process. I hope everyone will recognise the mandate we've received and that party members expect our party to deliver for them in Parliament.
Thanks.
At that point then, Jeremy Corbyn walked into the pub to address supporters some more. We will of course be telling you more about what he had to say very soon. I think we're getting some more pictures. Just recorded earlier on outside that pub again, whereas where you may have heard Norman Smith saying quite an unusual venue for him, as Jeremy Corbyn doesn't drink. But we'll be bringing you more of what he had to say to supporters later on. Also, he's expected to talk at that refugee rally in Parliament Square around 4 o'clock. We'll bring that to you as well. But let's move away from politics for just a moment, and it's time to take a look at the weather forecast now with Stav Daneos. Hi, Stav.
Hi there, Anita. Thanks very much. Well, the weather's sadly turning quite autumnal over the next week or so. We've had a band of rain spreading northwards overnight through this morning across the country, and following on behind some pretty hefty thundery downpours across northwest England towards northern England as well. But lots of sunshine as well, and pretty decent temperatures in the southeast, around 21, 22 Celsius. This evening and overnight we lose that wind and rain band across northern areas. It still stays quite blustery across western Scotland with a few showers, across Wales and the southwest of England too. But central eastern areas actually a dry night with clear spells. May turn fairly chilly underneath clear skies in Ross, but places maybe a little mist and fog as well. For Sunday though, central eastern areas after a fairly cool start, enjoying a nice day actually, lots of sunshine, further showers across parts of the north and the west, and the next area of low pressure beginning to make inroads across the southwest corner. A few heavy, maybe thundery showers later on in the day across the southeast, and temperatures generally around the mid to upper teens Celsius. Now the week ahead is looking certainly unsettled. We'll see loads of areas of low pressure moving and bringing lots of rain. It will be quite windy as well, with gales in places, but some sunshine too. Won't be a complete washout. I'll be back in half an hour with the more detailed weather.
Hello, very good afternoon to you. This is BBC News with me, Anita McVeigh. The headlines now at 2:30 exactly. Jeremy Corbyn is elected Labour leader after winning nearly 60% of the vote in the first round.
We don't have to be unequal. It doesn't have to be unfair. Poverty isn't inevitable. Things can, and they will, change.
Tom Watson is elected as the party's deputy leader and pledges his full support to Mr Corbyn. Former leader Ed Miliband has given his reaction to the result.
I'll be offering Jeremy Corbyn my support, and I hope people across the party do so too. I hope also, and I expect him to do this, that Jeremy reaches out to all parts of the party.
Now on BBC News, it's time for Dateline with Gavin Esler, and that includes a discussion on the Labour leadership election.
And welcome to Dateline London. The leadership of the Labour Party. How can the party's wounds be healed? And would it be a good idea to ask, what is Labour actually for in the 21st century? Plus, Britain's longest reigning monarch, what is it about the Queen that has proved so successful for so long? My guests today are Eunice Goes, who's a Portuguese writer, Thomas Kielinger of Die Welt, Steve Richards of The Independent and Janet Daly of The Sunday Telegraph. Good to see you. Well, the Labour Party is trying to rebuild after a catastrophic defeat in May's general election and a near wipeout in what was its stronghold in Scotland. But what is achievable under a new leader? And to be brutal about it, what is the point of the Labour Party right now? Let's start with this quite astonishing result. Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party, by a landslide.
Yeah, I always think politics is fascinating, but this is one of the most unbelievable political stories I've covered. I think possibly the most unbelievable. Here is a figure who has never served on a front bench of his party in opposition or government, who never thought he would be leader of the party remotely, winning by a landslide, by a bigger margin than Tony Blair won in 1994. It is a massively significant result. He has the authority with his party to do almost what he likes, but with his parliamentary party, he's in a minority position. And it is just extraordinary. Labour needed a volcano, in my view, and it's certainly got one.
Well, just to
volcanic eruption.
Volcanic eruption. There's two bits. You said within his party he can do what he likes, because he's got a huge mandate for them. Not everybody is happy in Parliament, in the parliamentary party, and then there's the other big question, which is the country, how far he can
get with. Now, he made a victory speech after he won, and the tone was conciliatory, and he will try to form a shadow cabinet which represents the so-called broad church of the Labour Party. He might struggle to do that, because some people won't serve, but he's going to try to do that. However, the issues that will become really problematic quickly are over policy. So, for example, he's got a new deputy, Tom Watson, who's pledged 100% loyalty. But they disagree on quite a few key policy areas. And Cameron and Osborne are going to present one vote in the House of Commons after another, where these divisions are fairly pivotal. Renewal of Trident, military action in Syria, some welfare issues,
trade union
and trade union reforms coming up very, very soon. So the problem always in politics in the end is not actually about presentation and all the rest of it, but it's about managing a party. He's had no experience of doing so, and he's about to be tested big time, and it's over these policy issues, I think, where the tests will.
And never mind the media howl round, which will now follow because the scrutiny will be huge. But do you see, just to put this in a European context maybe, do you see this as sort of like the Podemos moment or the Syriza moment, where in other words, in those cases separate parties in Spain and Greece, but where a traditional social democratic party has found its vote collapsing and has gone to the left?
It's somewhat similar, but it's also very, very different, because this is happening in the Labour Party and not outside the Labour Party. So on this account, it's already very, very different. But it captured that atmosphere of an unsatisfied youth, youth that wants to participate, who's active in politics, who's been active in social movements, in local social movements, in other political parties, who all of a sudden see a voice within the mainstream party, a party that can win an election, a voice that speaks like them and who's open, or seems to be open, to a different form of politics. What I think is interesting was the questions that I was receiving from Portugal and other European countries was, will it be the new voice for the European Social Democratic left? And it's interesting that next week on Sunday we're going to have an election in Greece. Early in October there's going to be elections in Portugal, and in December elections in Spain. And it's going to be very interesting how the socialist parties within these countries are going to look at Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn to see what is it that they can copy from him, because they are PASOK, PSOE in Spain, the Socialist Party in Portugal. They are not leading opinion polls. In Portugal, the socialists have a very, very small lead. In Spain and in Greece, the socialist parties are completely destroyed. I think permanent opposition is a real possibility. So they are looking, and they will look at Jeremy Corbyn as a kind of hope. Now, the big problem, as Theo has said, is how Jeremy Corbyn is going to manage the parliamentary party. It's not that he has the right of the party that doesn't want to do, was furious, and you see them on Twitter having heart attacks, completely apoplectic with the result, but also so many Labour MPs who said, I never had a chat with Jeremy Corbyn. He never attended a parliamentary Labour Party meeting. Who is he? So he has a lot of work to do within the parliamentary party in order to to have some form of unity or at least acquiescence from his MPs.
Janet, he's done one thing you have to give him credit for. He really has shaken up politics, hasn't he?
On a very small scale. Less than 500,000 people voted in this election out of a population of, 63 million? The point about Jeremy Corbyn is that this secular sect, this evangelical sect, represents such a tiny minority of the population as a whole. This is a sign, really, I hate to sound churlish about this, not of the rejuvenation of interest in the Labour Party, but of the contraction of it. It's now become a minority within a minority within the kind of left liberal consensus. That it's a sign that the general population has fallen away. The great mass of working class and lower middle class people who used to support the Labour Party are no longer actively participating, and even the youth vote, it's a small minority of the youth. There's been extraordinary opinion polling over the last year that shows generally the political position of the young is moving to the right on all kinds of issues, on the economy, on Europe, and suddenly there's this kind of passionate but very tiny section of the population who have been invigorated and who have been brought into this, what may turn out to be a permanent minority of activism and agitation, which is really outside the mainstream of politics as a whole.
Thomas, rebirth of the Labour Party or the contraction of the Labour Party?
I happen to slightly disagree with you, Janet, which I'm sorry for, because mostly I have one mind with yours. It's not a contraction. If you've been to some of his rallies, people came to flock to him, and there was always not enough room to accommodate them all. They didn't all vote for him. So the result of the participation of the vote, to me, is not a reflection of it. I think the support for him is much broader than we might think around the table that you happen to think. I once recently studied Winston Churchill in the early years when he was Home Secretary, and together with Lloyd George, he promoted his social programs and virtually inaugurated the welfare state. And Churchill talked about the left-out millions. Mm-hmm. And there is a sense you get in current Britain of the left-out millions who are suffering under the regime of austerity, which the majority of the bourgeois middle classes suffer with gritted teeth. But there is a rebellion in the land about that you can't access housing. There's no more hope for the young to ever possess a piece of real estate. Social services are being cut. And don't underestimate this.
Can I just make one point about the youth thing? I was a youthful left-wing activist, and I remember very well that this was a social bonding thing as much as anything else. There's a kind of shared enthusiasm that is more of a adolescent social thing than an actual basis in political conviction.
That's how the trade unions were created, Janet. I think it's not just youthful enthusiasm.
But
this was how trade unions, which were a massive organizations at the end of the 19th century, 20th century, and this empathy is very important because it's through this empathy and social organisation.
The trade unions, that is the issue that you raised at the beginning. What is the Labour Party for? The original impetus of the Labour Party was through trades unionism, cooperative societies, the kind of 19th century and early 20th century working class movements. It had deeply honourable roots. We now live in a post-industrial society, a global economy, a society in which the intelligent trades, the intelligent professions are now pushing out the old sort of working class trades. This is a completely different picture.
That's exactly what I wanted to get onto about what Corbyn's Labour Party could be in fact for. I mean, what would be the defining sense of this party that would be sellable to the British public? I mean, we know what he's against. Sorry, we know some of the things he's against. What
he's for a lot of things, but I mean, there are two things. First of all, we mentioned that he's going to face problems in Parliament, but I wouldn't want to elevate these parliamentary internal opponents as great titanic figures like the SDP people of the early 80s. They don't know what they're for,
so
and that's been part of the problem. No, I mean, these people have got to do some deep thinking at last, the so-called anti-Corbyn soft left, or whatever you want to call them, instead of waffling about we must own the future. And these Blairites in the media who loftily slag off everything never come up with their own coherent set of proposals. So they've got to do some deep thinking. At least Jeremy Corbyn has got a policy agenda. I listen to that lot and I don't hear anything. And they've got to start thinking deeply and quickly.
Blairism was always an incoherent, attempt to be kind of soft Toryism with a human
third way.
face.
Which is the phrase you don't hear anymore.
It was never coherent.
So they've got to. So that's got to be. So that's, I think, an important point in Corbyn's favour, that there will be these policy divisions. I've no idea how he's going to manage them, but he does not face at the moment a bunch of heavyweight centre-left politicians with a coherent set of their own ideas, and he at least has coherence, momentum,
but what
and
he does
energy.
face is a government which has been re-elected after 7 years of austerity, and if the next 4 or 5 years are of reasonable economic growth, would it not be difficult to see how he could lead a Labour Party to victory in 2020, despite all the things?
Yeah, but to answer the Janet's point about the changed labour force, which is unarguable. I mean, where I live in North London, most people work in cafes, it seems to me. There are about 50 cafes on the high street, and that's become their offices. However, the level of insecurity is almost as high as it was in the era that you described. And that level of insecurity needs to be addressed. Now, there is space for a centre-left programme which starts to do it. The young people want housing, and affordable housing, for example. Some of these people in their mid-50s are setting up companies and freelance. They want some sense that the government will help them with, say, super-fast broadband. I mean, there is a role for government in all of this. There isn't some sort of free market paradise that we're all living in. Now, they've got to define what government is for and what it can do, and make it sound benevolent to the
Tories are right in there, occupying that ground. That's the thing. I mean, this was the real problem for Labour, even before Blairism, which is that the argument about command economy versus free market economics was over. So if you can't argue for command economy anymore, if you can't argue for the state ownership of the means of production anymore,
Janet, but there are far more alternatives than those ones.
Yes, exactly, but that's what Corbyn represents.
No, it does not represent that. It does not represent that. There are other alternatives, and I think this is the problem with the political debate in Britain, is that you either have white or black. In fact, there are lots of shades of grey, and there are lots of different roles that the state can do, different forms of ownership, and different types of control that the state can do to make the market economy to work better. But going back to the question of the electoral base of the Labour Party, if it is true that we have a shrinking industrial working class, there is a whole army out there of low-paid workers, from the people work industries, the care work, the cleaners in hospitals, the dinner ladies in schools, not to mention the whole precariat that is working now in schools, teaching, at universities teaching, people who are not on safe jobs, who are living hand-to-mouth,
it's the public sector that are the safe jobs. The people who are really in jeopardy are your people working in the cafes, in the private sector, who have no security, no guaranteed pay increases.
Absolutely, and the Labour Party gave up on them in a sense that it gave up on the idea that people cannot be unionised. Not necessarily.
I think there is space. I mean, I don't think the Conservative Party is commanding all this space, actually.
But they're trying to.
That might be their political strategy, but if it is, they've got some way to go to realising it, because there is a high level of insecurity, and which involves some fairly fundamental policy decisions. I've mentioned housing, which includes not just house building, but how you get rents that these people won't have jobs to get mortgages because they're not employed by people for 25 years any longer. All that's changed. So it's going to need a lot of deep thinking and restructuring. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is someone who is, who's going to be over 70 by the time in the next election, and is still rooted to some extent in the 80s, although I think he will show a flexibility in his thinking in the coming months. Let's see. So he's not the ideal figure to lead this, but at least he has a programme.
Let me bring in Thomas on this, because one of the things I talked to a leading member of the Labour Party recently, who was pointing out that their research about who votes UKIP, in a nutshell, 4 million people who vote UKIP, many of them would tend to have been core Labour voters. How do you win them back? Do you win them back on a programme in which the leader of your party, for instance, is very sceptical about NATO, perhaps wants to get out of the European Union, which very pro-immigration, and those kind of things, some of which have been blown up to be smears in the press, Mr Corbyn's supporters would say, but others which are things he's argued about for decades.
I think on the face of it, it doesn't look probable that he can win anyone back on the issue of those, on the platform of those issues. But I think the majority interest in this country is for home topics, for domestic problems. And the term I come back to is the left out millions. We all agreed around this table that there is a rather tenuous living platform for millions of people, despite the Tories covering the central ground. But it's a very fragile coverage. And when Gavin talks about the growing economy, that growth is also rather fragile.
Yeah.
It is lots.
It's not for everyone either.
It's not for everyone at all. And so I think he is going to be a thorn in the flesh of the establishment to define their policy more clearly and make it appear more in tune with those people who demand a better life for themselves.
That issue of being a thorn in the side of the establishment is a recurrent theme in almost all the developed countries now. In the United States, it's taking a right-wing form with Donald Trump. Anybody who looks like not a professional politician is benefiting from it. There's a sense that professional politicians have become a closed club, that this is a game for professionals, that they talk their own language, they talk only to each other, and I think he's benefiting from that in a way that has very little to do with his actual ideological
Would you agree that it's fair to say that it would be a terrible mistake to underestimate Jeremy Corbyn after what we've seen over the past 3 months? Well, you're joking on it, but you kind of agree.
It's one of those classic things where, in retrospect, you can see that it sort of makes sense with what happened in Scotland, you know, after the referendum, with UKIP winning that European election the summer before last. You know, it is partly, as Janet has identified, there is an anti-politics mood that produces all kinds of things that surprise us, and then retrospectively we say, of course, that kind of makes sense. So Corbyn now sort of makes sense, even though I can hardly believe what's happened today, even though we kind of knew it was going to happen and we sort of know why it has happened. It still remains extraordinary, but it's part of this anti-politics mood which is in America as well.
It's not just young people and recent supporters of the Labour Party who voted for him. I mean, he got votes in each of the sections.
Absolutely,
So
and it was across generation. And I think the other reality that Labour has to face is that whoever would lead the Labour Party from 2015 faces a totemic task ahead, because it's not going to be easy at all. Labour lost in 2010 on all fronts. To be able to win a majority after boundary changes, it's going to be next to impossible. British voters, the British electorate has changed dramatically. The country no longer evenly splits between Labour and Conservative voters. We have a very fragmented electorate, and I think Labour will have to learn how to, first start to open up to other forces, to do tactical alliances with other forces if it wants to be back in power again.
Certainly, the country certainly does not split along class lines. That's something that I think is a serious flaw in the Corbyn programme. There isn't a working class, solidly working class movement. All those working class voters who voted for UKIP, many of them voted for the Tories, many of them consider themselves, they don't use the Blair word aspirational, but they do not consider themselves to be class loyalists who want to remain, you know, loyal to the proletariat. That is not the scene any longer.
That's a good thing about it, Janet, but I want to come back to the anti-politics mood in the country. Where does it come from? Because I think the political debate has become stalemate in the last few years. It revolves around austerity. Very little thinking is being administered to what lies behind it and how many people are closed off from this. And I think he doesn't have to be oriented towards the working class. He thinks he is the head of a movement. And the movement is about those people who want better answers from the powers that be, from the government, to create a more equitable society. There's nothing wrong with Corbyn pronouncing this as his main platform. There is a sense that, yes, we need improvement. And the end of the line is not Tory government forever.
No.
So there will be a sharper debate.
But he's arguing for improvement of a particular ideological complexion, which I think is out of step really more with working class voters than middle class ones. I think there are loads of middle class people in Islington who love Jeremy Corbyn, and a lot of working class ones, I know personally, a lot of working class ones in the north who loathe what he's saying.
Well, as we continue to take the pulse of the British people, let's move on to something else, because there used to be an old joke about there being only 5 royal houses in our future: hearts, clubs, spades, diamonds, and the House of of Windsor. While historically the British people have, from time after time, fallen out of love with the monarchy now, as an institution, has rarely looked stronger than during this Elizabethan age. Why is that? How much credit